Welcome to Wisco Dice! Hey, yo, folks, I am your host, Conesy with the Most, and I am joined today by...
Hey, I'm Suzanne, and we have our special guest today, Josh. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Josh Rosing. I am Lone Colossas Games, and I publish a lot of content for 5e and also new role-playing game systems.
Well, that's awesome. This is episode 151, by the way, folks, of the Wisco Dice Tabletop Gaming Podcast, and we are excited to talk to Josh today about an upcoming project that is going to be hitting the market and very soon here on crowdfunding. But I'm actually really excited about this one. So we're not just talking about this from the perspective of, hey, this is another product that's coming, that's out there. We're talking about this because this is an exciting thing that, me from a game master, GM, judge, whatever you want to call it, in the RPG space, I'm really excited to actually run this and play because it seems really unique, different on the TTT RPG space. So,
oh, good. I'm glad you want to run this because I was looking through all the stuff, but I'm like, gosh, this just seems different and than what I've played before, and I'm not going to run a game.
So, Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this project is? What is this new thing you got coming out here soon, or at least coming out to crowdfunding?
Yeah, so One of Us Will Die is a new RPG. It comes from a Filipino game designer, Titus Villanueva III, and it is a fast, tense, and emotionally charged tabletop role-playing game where one player begins the game knowing that their character is going to die. It can be played in either one-shots or campaign scenarios, but yeah, it is one of the first, it is not the first in the world, but one of the first social deduction tabletop RPGs. So you are trying to figure out who the mark is, the person who is fated to die by the end of the game. And you'll do that by identifying the milestones that they're hitting, narrative milestones throughout the game. So there are basically tells that they have to hit in order to die at the end of the game, and everyone is sort of competing to take control of that death scene. And so it could be, if you're the mark, you're going to die probably in some tragic way, and it could be heroic, but it's usually like, this death was potentially avoidable, or someone could have seen it coming, but they didn't, and therefore this character dies in this way. There's also the other two roles that are hidden roles that are in the game are traitor. This is very common in social deduction games. In fact, most social deduction games have a traitor of some kind. This is the werewolf in Werewolf, or like the mafia members in Mafia, right? The people who are trying to kill the mark, or in those other games, the villagers or whatever, right? There's not always a traitor in One of Us Will Die. You can opt out of having one, but it's usually just randomly determined whether or not there is one. And then the generic role is the adventurer. The adventurer is also trying to figure out who the mark is, but for the purpose of taking their place in death. So this is usually going to be more heroic, self-sacrificing sort of death, where you figure out who is the person that was supposed to die, and you get in the way of that in some way.
Yeah, very interesting. And different. I mean, I think the idea that a character is going to die every time you kind of play this is interesting and different. And you mentioned campaign play, right? And so how does that, like, if are players constantly cycling through characters that are dying every session?
Yeah, so it depends. There are multiple ways of playing it as a campaign. When I first heard about the game, when Titus first told me about it, I thought, oh, this is going to be great for one-shots, right? But I don't see how it would work for a campaign mode. But he actually has a really cool way of doing it, where you can either play it sort of in an episodic style of campaign, where, yeah, someone dies every session, and then you sort of remake the survivors into the next session. So this sort of represents, like, fictional characters can kind of change what archetype they are. So whether they're like someone who, so for example, an archetype in the game is the lover. They have an other. It can be an actual lover of theirs, or it could just be like a friend or someone else that is so important to them that that is their life, right? And so that other is always going to be important to the game. Well, if that other is no longer important, or if something happens there, then this character is going to change away from that archetype into something else, right? So you might end up rebuilding your character between each session in an episodic campaign where someone dies every time. The other option is a progressive campaign. So these are more like a traditional kind of RPG campaign that you'd be used to, where you actually grow and progress as characters through the adventure. You might increase your ability scores, or other gain new abilities and that sort of thing. And the entire story builds up to one person's death. And actually, you don't know who the traitor or mark would be until you get to that final session. And so the decisions that you've made as players influence who the GM ends up choosing as the mark. So in that case, you're not randomizing the rolls. It's actually based off of the decisions that have happened throughout the gameplay. And then there's a third campaign type where you actually combine both of those. So you'll progress through certain parts, but there might be multiple time points during the story where someone dies.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, that's I think that's a clever way to, well, I mean, there's multiple ways to do that, right?
Yeah, well, and it seems like it also brings some replayability into this same game, like with the same players too.
Sure.
Because it's always something's gonna change, like who the traitor is, who the mark is. Well, and it always change pretty easily.
I mean, I really latched on right away to the episodic kind of play of it, because like that reminds me a lot of, like, you watch a series of horror movies, right? Like Friday the 13th, 1, 2, 3, like the character roles, and some, like, there are reoccurring like survivors that are, in classic horror tropes that go from like film to film, and their roles change like throughout the series. Like in Alien, Sigourney Weaver's character changes, Ripley changes her role from like the beginning to like the final time she appears. So I think that's like a really neat way that you can embrace that in a storytelling mode while still continuing to have this kind of feel with a game like this.
Yeah. So if you don't, like, there's someone who's like in these different roles that may be determined later, like if we're looking at the campaign version of it or something, are all the players still kind of playing cooperatively like you do in a lot of RPGs?
Yeah. It's still cooperative storytelling, right? The only sort of competitive aspect of it is trying to be the person who activates their role. So that's where you get to narrate the death scene. And usually you're still working together towards some common purpose, right? So the scenario that I got to play is called I think Shadow of the Dragon. In it, basically, and the scenarios are very adaptable. So this could be used to run something else, but taking it more literally, we were just like heroes that had been called to defend a city from some, really powerful dragon that was going to destroy it. And so we are all heroes, but there was still a possibility that one of us is a traitor, right? And then would, backstab us in the end and end up destroying the city or something, right? We didn't end up having a traitor in that game, but regardless, we would have all been working toward trying to defeat the dragon. There's still a possibility where if there's a traitor, we still defeat the dragon, but the traitor ends up, killing the mark for unrelated, they have their own personal vendetta or something, right? So you could still have that sort of experience. But yeah, it's interesting because it's a very different, like, everyone's sort of like on edge toward the end of the game when someone's about to die, because you're like, oh, can it be me, right? So there is that sort of feeling of like competition, of like, you get your heart racing a little bit more and like, get into it a lot in a way that you don't necessarily feel with a lot of other games, I think.
Well, and I've played a lot of board games that have a hidden hidden roles on them that go beyond, like, the Battlestar Galactica is a really good example of like a hidden role game where you have players on. You start the game, you might even have one role, and then your role might change mid game.
Yeah.
And the tension that brings to the table versus like just playing a normal board game that maybe has a horror theme or something. Like, you play a game like Call of Cthulhu even, or from a role-playing perspective, do you really feel tension at the table about, while you're playing your character, versus when you have a game where you might have somebody else working against you as a traitor or something like that. It seems like that brings a different level of tension and strategy and conversation to the table. And I think that's, seeing that in a TTRPG, and there aren't a lot of them that have this, is really unique and clever, and gets me kind of excited, especially for, I don't know about running it from an extended game, but running it for a one shot or a couple of one shots, I really am excited to try that and see how players react.
Yeah, for sure. I think Titus had a really great point when he was first talking about the game, that like there is a strong difference between like, you're playing like D&D and it's like, oh, there's always a chance someone dies, right? Where versus a game of like, we know someone's going to die. It's just a matter of who and when and how, right? And so it's a very different feeling to play the game and know that someone is going to die at the end of it. And in some ways it helps. You're like, okay, I can't get too attached to these characters because I know one of us is going to die. But also, like, you do form that attachment, I think, especially over a long campaign, and someone's going to die. And so it feels probably even more, tragic by the end of it, because there are so many there's so many mechanics tied to narrative, or rather, it's not a mechanically complex game. It's very narrative focused, and so most of the character sheet is just saying, here are the narrative things you need to do to accomplish your character and like be this role, and so you end up doing a lot of sort of inter-character like relationship building and stuff during the course of even just a single session, revealing your backstory to people, being very sort of vulnerable in character, and so then it makes that final like death even more tragic, right, when it finally happens.
So I think I saw somewhere in here that there's going to be a bit of Filipino folklore kind of tied into this as well.
Yeah.
I think for people who aren't familiar with that, can you give us a little bit more of an idea of what that kind of means, or what that looks like, kind of from a theme or narrative perspective? I think that's definitely something very unique. I haven't seen personally in the TTRPG space at all.
Yeah. So I am less familiar with that side of things at the moment, just because I haven't fully finished going through the entire manuscript and everything. I'll be editing the game, but that is something I haven't fully like started doing yet, right? I've read the quick start, and I've edited that, so I'm very familiar with that part. I do know that, like, for example, a number of the scenarios in the book are going to be using either just like that there's one that we have as a stretch goal that will be set in a location in the Philippines, in sort of relatively modern times, but using sort of supernatural, folklore as like a cause for a murder, right? There's so there are going to be a few that are actually the title of the adventure is in Tagalog, and then there will be a translation and information about like, this is why it was named this, or right, like some more information about the background of that. But sort of just generally speaking, sort of monsters and supernatural concepts and things. The other big one is the concept of Hugo, which, as I'm trying to remember how Titus has explained this, because I don't have it written in front of me.
Sure.
But it has to do with the like emotional connection and attachment between people, and so this is a very like, the game obviously focuses a lot on emotions around death and surviving someone else's death, right? And so that is another sort of like core like philosophical concept that is very central to the game.
Sure. No, I like, from a personal relationship perspective, that's it's I think it's an interesting topic to dive into and try to explore in a role playing game. I think there's a lot of classic ways that you can use that. I mean, film's been using that in things constantly. I mean, so there's you always get that like flashback scene. So many films have that like flashback scene at the beginning of the, or I should say that here's what's going to happen scene at the beginning of the film, and then you have 3 days ago. This is where our character was, and you follow along until you get to that point where you have the sacrifice or whatever that happens. So I think that's going to be a neat thing to have.
So I guess, Josh, this is a game that you didn't design.
Right.
And a lot of the times we've talked to you, it's been works that you've been designer and the publisher on them. So is this the first one that you haven't done the design for, and Lone Colossas Games is just the publisher?
Yeah, so this is sort of my foray in some ways into traditional publishing. It's not something I plan to do a lot of, but the Philippines is a country that I think it's because of Stripe payouts or something, they can't run Kickstarter campaigns as a company based in the Philippines. And I spent about a year talking to Titus about the game and just trying to help him find a way to publish it before like fully committing to doing it myself. It was something I'd been considering, but it is sort of a step of, like, okay, now I have to manage royalties and all of these extra sort of administrative things. But I really like the game and I really wanted to see it out there. So I decided that I was going to go ahead and help publish it. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. And so how did you actually discover this game, One of Us Will Die, or how did you get connected with Titus? Was it a just chance encounter, cross passing at the airport, or?
Yeah, I think he had asked a question in a Discord that I was in about crowdfunding options, and I just started talking to him through just like private chats to try and help with some of those questions. And then, it was basically just like, okay, the biggest barrier to entry is just I can't run a crowdfunding campaign from the Philippines. And so, yeah, I at that point started considering actually just publishing the game myself.
It's pretty cool. Makes it worth to make those connections and speak up in the chats and Discord and other places.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, you never know where you're going to bump into somebody that actually might help make your dream come to reality, right? So you just got to keep working it until it happens.
Yep.
I think for me as a GM, we talked a little bit about kind of the overall feel of the game, obviously, and the kind of the theme of the game and where it goes. And I think you mentioned it's it's multi-genre, right? As far as kind of the structure of the game, it doesn't really matter if you want to do it modern or fantasy,
right,
or horror or steampunk or whatever. Yeah, do you have in the core rules? Is there going to be how is that handled? I guess in the core rules, to be able to go from a genre that might have superheroes and mutants to Gaslight and London to somewhere in the Pacific Ocean on an island.
Yeah. So have you played with the Fate system before?
I I'm aware of it, but I haven't actually
Sure.
played with it.
So it's not like super mechanically similar, but the idea of how you would use, for example, Fate for so many different settings applies here as well, right? You don't have a character class, you have an archetype, and the archetype is literally just a fictional character type, right? So the fool is someone who is very cynical and might not help anyone ever, and then they maybe at the end sort of, it's the like I don't know if I'm gonna do anything, and then they come back and they save the day. Like Han Solo could be played as a fool because he leaves and then he comes back and he helps save everyone, right? That's a very sort of like fool thing to do in terms of the game's archetype. And so like actually you'll find examples of characters from all kinds of different genres for all of the archetypes. Titus has created a list for each one as some examples of fictional characters that fit the archetype. But it's really just, you just sort of pick the kind of person that you're playing, and the abilities that they have and all of that is just narrative description, right? So if you're playing a superhero and you want to be able to fly, sure, that makes sense in superhero land, right? Like you can fly, you're a superhero. Or you want to have like super high tech gadgets or whatever, right? That doesn't make sense in historical setting where there's no magical powers, right? The magician archetype, for example, can be an actual mage. That's actually what I played when I played a mage golem. And if you're in a non-magical setting, you might be a street magician or something, right? Someone who can do tricks, someone who has these abilities to like, appear to be magical, perhaps. They always show up at the right time or whatever, right? They have these sort of scenes that make them seem like a magician, but they're not magic, right? So it's just a matter of essentially flavoring things how you like.
Sure. And so I think we kind of talked about the fate system, right? We mentioned it here because big part of the fate system is just a very simple way of how you resolve conflict with dice, right? How are you approaching in this, or how is Titus approaching in this, I should say, conflict resolution? Because at some level, the dice are always the kind of the one random thing that you can't control in this. Otherwise, we'd just be doing an improv session.
So you roll with dice pools of up to 3d6 usually. It's just your ability score, or your characteristic value, which is 1 through 3. And if you get a 5 or a 6, you succeed. And if you get, I think, 1s and no successes, it can be very bad for you. It's sort of like a critical failure. And if you get a 6, then it's a good success. If you get 2 6s, that's sort of like an extra critical success. And the more 6s you get, the more narrative control you as the player have over the story. So if you had 2 6s, I think you actually get to narrate the success. 3 6s, you can like add extra stuff on top of that. It is theoretically possible to roll more than 3d6. Some archetypes allow you to like add another ability on top of what you're already rolling, so you could roll like 5d6 and get 5 6s, which would be completely ridiculous, but you could go like way over the top with your description, right, and take a whole bunch of good stuff for the group. So that is the sort of core dice mechanic, is just whenever you do something that is dramatically important, then you will roll. Otherwise, you generally just succeed at what you're doing. So if I wanted to climb up a building to do a thing, and it didn't matter if I got up there quickly or not, or like it could be assumed that I get up there, I'm not going to roll for it, right? But if me falling off from the tower is important, or not making it up there in time is important, then I would be rolling for it.
Sure. I mean, those are always the things that the GM needs to adjudicate, right? Is part of the gameplay. Is how important is this to a dice roll, to what's happening in the story? But it sounds like, as far as, okay, we're gonna I rolled a 6, or I rolled 2 5s on this roll or whatever. the player has a little more narrative control over describing the outcome of that success, and being able to have a more active role than in the game than players might have, like say in a traditional Dungeons and Dragons game. That's much more, okay, I rolled, I did 12 points of damage with my sword, and then they move on.
Yeah. Speaking of combat, I don't think we have combat rules in the quick start, but so Titus is actually a HEMA practitioner, and so the combat rules are very like attack and defense are trade-off, right? You get a certain number of dice that you can roll, and then you're going to assign results from those dice to your attack or defense pools. And I think it's basically just like, again, 5s and 6s. That number of 5s and successes that you get in your combat pool, you can sort of divide between defending yourself from enemies that you're engaged with and actually attacking and causing harm on them. And harm is tracked through plot armor. Because, of course, in fiction, you are immune through plot armor. You can take whatever kind of damage, and it doesn't really matter what it is or how much damage it is. It just, once you run out of plot armor, then you are able to die. And no one can die before the final scene. But, if your plot armor is reduced, then something could happen to you in that final act. Even if you're not the mark, you can still die.
Sure, or something else horrible or whatever, right? I would imagine, like, hey, you come out, you might come out of the final scene where, especially if you're playing in like the campaign mode we were talking about earlier, a player could come out with a horrible niggling injury that's going to impact them, or they're locked up in an insane asylum afterwards, or whatever wherever you're going narratively, or the superhero at the end of it, they lose their powers.
Yeah, right. So death is not necessarily the only outcome of having 0 plot armor. It could be something else, but your character is retired essentially after that point.
Yeah, I played enough TTRPGs over the years to realize that for some players, character death is not very meaningful, but when you leverage other aspects like brutal injuries and other things, the scariest thing ever in old school RPG, old school D&D type or Dungeons and Dragons type RPGs has always been things like level drain or ability score loss, or like I said last night in my game, I hit somebody with an attack on a creature that reduced their weapons effectiveness. So all of a sudden, like, the immediate response from the player was, "Oh, my thing is useless now. Like, it's a -1 to hit. It's like it does all the same stuff. It's just -1 to hit, but it's the end of the world. Character death, nothing. But this end of the world." So like, it definitely, I think that kind of thing really helps to when you know your players to really add to a game, especially a game I think like this where, somebody's gonna die. Get over it.
Then you just start all over with a new character the next time.
Yeah, new role.
Play it again.
Or you're bringing back for the sequel, or you're bringing characters back for the sequel that survived, and they get new roles. That's
so actually something so Titus has a Discord server for this game. He has a pretty big following in the Philippines. So it's been playtested a fair bit already. But actually something that we were talking about just the other day was, what if we did a sort of like, not a tournament, but like almost like a mini like 20-person convention, right? Where you have, a group of people running a game all at the same time, and then all of the characters that die go to the final game as like their spirits or whatever in some final afterlife, and then one of them is going to like fully get erased or something, just as like a really cool like scenario of like, oh, it's one of us will die, but we've all already died.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of thinking like that would be a fun thing to do. Just have all the dead characters, and then have a little reunion of them, and they can play again. And
yeah, he's got something that he calls the multiverse builder, where essentially you keep running games in the same multiverse or universe or whatever you want to do, but every time a character dies, you can sort of memorialize them as NPCs in other worlds, where something, it's like a alternate timeline or alternate universe where it's like, oh, this person actually survived, and so when we play this, a different game in the same setting, quote unquote, but like alternate timeline, you actually get to meet that character as if they had survived and someone else died, right, in that setting. Or you can, do the same thing with villains, or have entities that exist in every world in your game, or whatever, right? Like, it's a really neat concept.
Yeah, I mean,
that
always
sound really cool.
Yeah, there's always that idea of like every decision, like this, like multiverse kind of theory. Every decision.
Like, branches out into another.
Like if we would have decided to show up and record this podcast or not, like if we chose not to, all the little timelines that trickle off of that branch out of all of the could have possibly beens and all those different worlds. So then you can just kind of rewind it and play through it again, but just change the timeline slightly.
Yeah, I don't want to be in the world where Josh is annoyed with us because we didn't show up. I don't want to be in a world where anyone's annoyed with me, like, because I don't show up, but especially Josh,
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, so this is coming to Kickstarter for crowdfunding, correct? It's Kickstarter. Okay. So do you want to tell our listeners like where, like, how they can find it on Kickstarter, and what, like, and how long the campaign's run and that type of thing?
Yeah, so it'll be live on Kickstarter from April 14th to May 14th. And it should be very easy to find if you just search for One of Us Will Die on Kickstarter. Or if you just Google One of Us Will Die, I think it's like the second result. The first one is Titus's Light Edition, which was on itch for a while. And if you back in the first 3 days, then there will be an early bird special for that. There is a free scenario PDF and also a enamel pin for anyone backing as a physical pledge.
It's really cool. There's a $300 pledge level, right?
Yes. So there is a private game with Titus for you and 3 of your friends that you can pledge for. And that also gives Titus a sizable bonus. Obviously, I'm not going to just make money off of him running games. So a lot of that extra money just goes to Titus directly. That will be a very limited tier. To be clear, he does on occasion run games in his Discord server for people. So that is not the only way to play a game with him, but they would be on your schedule. And private with your friends. So
pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Like because there's a lot of people I know that do RPGs, and being able to play with the designer or a celebrity from the RPG world, creation world, that's a huge bonus.
Oh yeah, no, that was a huge bonus with the recent GUI Cube Kickstarter for Guys and Gax, and being able to get a chance to play with Luke Gygax and Elphinius Goo. That I don't remember what those went for, those seats, but yeah, those were some prize seats and brought in some real cash to crowdfunding. So yeah, that's exciting too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tiers though for this that are really cool.
We need a tier so we can play with Josh.
Yeah, is there a tier for playing with the publisher?
There is not currently. I think Titus will do a much better job of running the game than I will, but
but I mean, like I was looking at the preview for this, and there's several different levels that make this very affordable for anyone who's interested to come and explore this system.
Right.
Or this, you know.
Right. You can just get the PDF and call it life, or you can really bling it out quite a bit with dice and hardback. I think I saw and a GM
screen, player screens, and we've got reusable character sheets as well, because obviously it is very geared toward one shots, or just, you know, if you have to remake a character because you're playing an episodic campaign, right, where someone dies every session, it just makes sense to have reusable character sheets. So these are dry erase, laminated, you know, color, you know, they're going to be high quality print character sheets that you can store in a folder, and that way you just have them. You can write on them for your session and erase it afterward, and you don't have to print out new sheets every single time and you know, waste all that paper. So
yeah, well, that's really cool.
Well, and if I think I also saw that if your players are like your traditional board gaming friends, or are familiar with games like Werewolf, where everybody gets a roll card,
yes,
you can get those.
So
there's
those are going to be
too.
essentially free with all pledges. Normally they'll cost $5, but yeah, they'll come free with every physical pledge during the campaign. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the final version of them, because they're going to be, there's a, you know, a mock-up of them, right? But they're going to have like a full beautiful illustration on them that is in the style of the rest of the book, and they're also going to have foil stamping on them. So probably something around the edges with like silver or whatever, something that's nice and flashy and feels really nice to look at, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's cool.
So for folks, again, this is going to come to crowdfunding on April 15th or April 14th. So yeah, I got to get it right. It's going to go for a month. If you're listening to this, you're probably listening to this while the show, or while it's live. But if you are catching the show after the crowdfunding campaign is complete, you're going to be able to go somewhere, right, Josh, to still be able to pick up a copy, or at least link back, if not, hopefully, you know, get a copy regardless.
Yeah, so you'll always be able to find where to pre-order it through the campaign page. There'll be a link there after the campaign ends. Most likely there'll be like a backer kit pre-order store, which is what I usually do. And then at some point, once the PDF is released, it'll transition to my web store, which is just shop.lonecolossasgames.com, which is also where you can find everything else that I publish.
Which includes one of my favorite 5e supplements now that I haven't actually brought to the table, but I've got some devious ideas in how to torture and make players suffer with injuries, enhance the game and actually make damage matter a little more, to a game where you can just long rest everything away.
You think I should be scared, huh?
Hey,
yeah, probably.
You can injure your enemies too, so it's not all bad.
This is true. Like
that's true.
Next time you're fighting a dragon, just cut its wings off and it can't fly away.
Yep.
Yeah. I tend to try and do that sometimes. Like, I'd befriend the giant spiders coming at us, and maybe I can injure the dragon. That sounds good. Yeah. Cut its wings off and then, you know, ride it around. Injured, and then enslave it. That sounds really bad.
Well, that would also be on theme for the book, I suppose. So
there you go.
So I think we're getting a little silly, but again, April 14th. Go ahead and make sure, hop over there as soon as you're done listening to this, or while you're listening to this, as we wrap up, and go ahead and make sure you back it so that you can ensure you get a copy. Good luck, Josh, to this crowdfunding campaign. I really look forward to One of Us Will Die. I'm actually pretty excited to actually be a backer and support it, and get a copy down the road.
I'm excited for him to back it.
I'm looking forward. I'm really the more I read about this one, the more I get kind of excited about how to run it, and the more we talked about it just tonight, like that idea of running maybe like something episodic where I don't have, like, I can insert this into my regular, like, RPG gaming where I can run one, let it go for a month or two, run another with the same batch of characters and just introducing one new character every time we play or so.
Yep.
You know, because, you know, somebody had to die. But it, you know, doing it in kind of that, like, you know, part 1, part 2, part 3 sequel episodic kind of flow. I think that gets me really excited.
Awesome.
Yes. So is there anything that we didn't touch on before we finish up here, Josh, that you wanted to point out, or did we hit all the highlights?
That's probably all the highlights.
Excellent.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We appreciate it. Until next time.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you leave a review of this show wherever your favorite place is to find podcasts. Oh, and by the way, give us a like on our Facebook page. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest while you're at it. If you haven't looked recently, make sure you catch up on the blog at wiscodice.com. Hey, Brian, what's that site?
Ah, darn, I forget. Justin, what's our website again?
Wiscodice.com.
That's right, it's wiscodice.com. And until next time, everyone, peace out.